part 2, before being diagnosed. Hello, so welcome back. This is the video series on living with postpartum psychosis and bipolar disorder. And in the video today, we're going to talk about what might you go through before you actually get diagnosed with postpartum psychosis. Okay? So before being diagnosed, you might already have some signs that you've got changes in behavior. You might be feeling overwhelmed and have a lack of concentration. And you might find yourself arguing with people or yelling at people. That is the behaviors that you don't usually do. Okay? Or another thing you might do is you might talk a lot. You might have trouble stopping to talk. You might have these really long ideas in your mind that you want to express to everyone, and you might want to do a lot of talking. Okay, one of the troubles with getting diagnosed before being acutely ill is that they have the same changes that are classified as normal for some women during pregnancy. So that's what happened to me in my situation. I said, look, there's all this weird stuff happening and it's not me, and I need to get help. And they all were like, oh no, but these are just normal things that happen during pregnancy. It's probably okay. So that's what they said to me. And why might you get missed? So one of the key things in Australia, in the Australian situation, because I'm Australian and I was living in Sydney at the time when I was pregnant, is that you get these surveys that the GP gives you or the midwife in the hospital, and they ask you questions, but the questions are focused on detecting postnatal depression. Okay? Why? Because postnatal depression is very common, it's more common, and so there's a lot of attention on that at the moment. But the problem is the symptoms for detecting postnatal depression are the opposite of the symptoms of diagnosing a mania, okay? In its simplest term. And this is one of the reasons I was missed, because when I did these surveys, they had nothing to do with what I was going through. And so I passed all the surveys. There was nothing wrong with me. I was great, apparently. Yeah. It is possible to have postpartum psychosis with either an initial mania or depression. That's just to let you know that, because it's possible that you did do that survey and you've got more depression side of things, and then maybe you do get recognised. But with my illness, I was a manic postpartum psychosis, not a depressive one. So I got missed. In the end, what was I diagnosed as having? They said that I had post-traumatic stress, and they didn't give me any medication, and they told me to go and see a psychologist. And I probably went to two visits, and I didn't get anything out of the visit whatsoever. It did not help me at all, so I gave up on going. So it was really tragic. So here we go. What's happening during the pregnancy? You're already getting unwell. You know that things are starting to change. You don't know what it is. You may try to get help and get nowhere if you're not acutely ill yet. This is another point I want to talk about that angers me for mental illnesses. You only get the treatment that you need at the hospital by the very experienced psychiatrist if you've been acutely ill. If you haven't been acutely ill yet, you don't get much treatment. You see your GP. If you're lucky, they might put you on medication, but you really need to see a psychiatrist. And it really upsets me that, at least in my country, we don't help people until they're acutely ill, which is really mean. Okay, if you're already diagnosed as bipolar, then you may already have a care plan and a support team looking after you. So a care plan, we're going to talk about it later in one of the later videos, but a care plan is basically Have I written it down here? No. Like, it's a plan. There's lots of different care plans, actually. We'll talk about it more. But basically, in this situation, we're talking about a care plan for your labour, your pregnancy, your labour, and afterwards. So who are your doctors? What medications do you have to take? What do you need to do? What are my symptoms? Okay, we'll talk about it more later. And then so in the support team there may be a midwife who's specialised in complex labour, complex pregnancy, or she might be, if you're lucky, even mental health midwife, you know, and the psychiatrist and the mental health and the family nurse and or nurses. Yeah, so if you're already ill, that's great for you because they're going to look after you in your first pregnancy. And I'm so jealous. Okay, and then during labour, often, like what I've written here is often the labour is the crunch time. It's when the psychosis really starts and when you start moving into this acute illness period. But it could be a different time. It could be earlier. It could be a few weeks after. But that's why it's called postpartum psychosis, because it happens around the time of the labour. What did I say? Oh, is the labour the cause of the illness? There's a lot of discussion. In the end, usually they say it's definitely a factor. Like, for example, for me, to me, it was a very traumatic labour. I almost had no painkillers at the end of the labour because I was taking gas and I wasn't doing anything. So I just stopped, and I had a 4.1 kilogram baby and I was screaming my head off. It was unbearable. So in my opinion, it's definitely a factor. Hormones, I'm not going to talk about hormones in these videos very much. Why? Because, oh, sorry, move the video. Why don't I want to talk about hormones? Because it's a really grey area, and I went and tried to explore the whole, how does it relate to hormones? You talk to a few different people. Basically, they sort of say that the illness, yes, it relates to hormones, but to the actual medicines that you take, it's got nothing to do with hormones. They work quite differently. That's the way in my brain that I remember the discussion. So you are more than welcome to go out there and study all the information on hormones. It is really interesting. Alright, well that's the end of the second video about what you might be dealing with prior to being diagnosed as having postpartum psychosis. The next video is going to be about the acute phase, and it's going to be quite a long video, so stay tuned.